I've got three advantages of drawing down taxable assets first in early retirement. Hi, I'm financial planner Sean Mullaney. Let's discuss. So these days, there are folks who are getting to financial independence and they're retiring early. And then the question becomes, well, what do I live on now that I'm early retired? Do I live off my taxable assets? Do I live off Roth assets? Or do I live off traditional retirement account assets? I believe that for many early retirees, the tax optimal path is to live off taxable assets first in early retirement. I've got three advantages of that strategy. First, that strategy generally sets up Roth conversions while one's taxable income is artificially low. Let's think about this for a second. If you get to early retirement, you're no longer attracting W 2 income or self employment income. So when you start to fill out your tax return, you're like, look, it looks like I'm artificially poor. I just don't have a whole lot of income here. Well, that's when you get to, well, wait a minute, what do I live off of? And there you have to sell assets or use cash that's in taxable assets to fund your living expenses. So say your living expenses in early retirement are $60,000 a year, and you find a mutual fund or a stock or something like that in your taxable portfolio to sell and fund that $60,000. Is your taxable income going to be $60,000? Almost certainly not. Almost certainly you have some tax basis in that mutual fund. And so your taxable income from that is 60,000 less your tax basis. And so it might be that without any other planning, you only have 20,000 of income if maybe your capital gain is 20,000 and then your interest and dividends are relatively modest as well, so maybe you have a little more than 20,000. That means you have an opportunity to do Roth conversions while you're in the 10% bracket or the 12% bracket, and these Roth conversions can, move money from the traditional retirement accounts to Roth accounts while your income is artificially low and you pay an artificially low tax rate on that. And then that money is in Roth accounts where it will never be subject to the RMD rules during your lifetime, and it will grow tax free. So you're getting a whole lot of benefits by living off those taxable assets and setting up Roth conversions in early retirement. The second thing that living off the taxable assets first does is it controls and ultimately reduces future uncontrollable taxable income. So what do I mean by that? Taxable assets are a good thing to have, don't get me wrong, but they tend to kick off interest, dividends, capital gain distributions, and sometimes those can happen in December without much warning, and they can be somewhat high. Now, in the last few years, we've been in a low yield world, so hasn't been that big of a problem for most early retirees with taxable assets. But we don't know that we're always going to live in a low yield world. So by diminishing those taxable assets first, you're slicing future interest, dividends, capital gains that would otherwise hit your income tax return, and you're giving yourself that much more leeway and runway for future tax planning. So I really like that about spending down those taxable assets first, is we reduce those future taxable income flows that result from having assets in brokerage accounts, bank accounts, those sorts of things. The third advantage of spending down the taxable assets first in early retirement is building up creditor protected assets. So what I'm talking about here is different financial assets enjoy different levels of creditor protection. The assets with the least amount of creditor protection are generally going to be those assets in taxable brokerage accounts. The assets with the highest level of creditor protection tend to be old 401ks, and then traditional IRAs, and then Roth IRAs. And especially for the IRAs, that creditor protection can vary, but it's certainly it's not non-existent in most states. So what you're doing in early retirement is you're saying, okay, I'm going to live off these taxable assets. They're going to go down. Meanwhile, in your traditional retirement accounts, your Roth retirement accounts, you're not drawing those assets down. So in most years, hopefully those assets are going to grow and grow and grow. So you're growing creditor protection assets, generally speaking, and you're diminishing those assets that creditors can much more easily access should you ever be sued. Now look, this strategy is part of an asset protection strategy, but it can be a good part of an asset protection strategy. Those in early retirement should also be thinking about things like personal umbrella liability insurance and other forms of property and casualty insurance. But overall, I like this idea of let's spend down the unprotected assets first, while the protected assets have even more opportunity to grow and leave us in a better balance sheet position with respect to creditor protection. So those are three main advantages of drawing down the taxable assets first in early retirement. What I've done is I've put a blog post in the description below that goes into this issue in a whole lot more detail. Hope you liked this video. If you did, please mash that like button and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next time.